evening, and welcome to Organizing for Change, a look at labor union history at Electric Boat. My name is Marian Galbraith, and I'm pleased to be your moderator for tonight, and I would like to introduce our panel. Beginning at my immediate right is Wayne Burgess. Wayne Burgess is a trustee of the John J. Driscoll United Labor Agency. He's a member of the Executive Committee of the Connecticut AFL-CIO and serves on the board of Charter Oak Federal Credit Union and the United Way. He's the financial secretary of the MDA UAW and the president of the Southeastern Connecticut Central Labor Council, which is comprised of 24 organized labor unions, including the MDA and the MTC. Next to Wayne is Mel Olson. Mel is a past president of the Marine Draftsmen Union, UAW, Local 571, and is a former piping design technician at Electric Boat General Dynamics in Groton, Connecticut, where he served for 47 years, including his 13 years as the union president. He's a longtime labor representative on the Eastern Connecticut Workforce Investment Board and works as a consultant to the Southeastern Connecticut Central Labor Council and the John J. Driscoll United Labor Agency on workforce training and working family issues, and has been a staunch worker advocate throughout Eastern Connecticut. Governor Dan Malloy has appointed Mel Olson, an Eastern Connecticut resident, to be a member of the Connecticut State Apprenticeship Council. The MDA, which is affiliated with the UAW, was founded in 1939 to represent the designers, draftsmen, technical writers, and engineering support personnel at Electric Boat. The MDA represents 1,800 workers. Next to Mel is Ken DelaCruz. Ken is president of the Metal Trades Council, which represents 2,400 people and which was formed between 1944 and 45 and actually brings together 9 member unions. These include the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, Iron Shipbuilders, Blacksmiths, Forgers, and Helpers, Local 614, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, Local 1302, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 261, the Laborers International Union of North America Shipyard and Marine, Local 364, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 1871, the Office and Professional Employees International Union, Local 106, the International Brotherhood of Painters and Allied Trades, Local 1122, and the United Association of Journeymen and Apprentices of the Plumbing and Pipe Fitting Industry of the United States and Canada, Local 777, and the Teamsters, Local 493. And next to Ken is John Olson. John is President Emeritus of the Connecticut AFL-CIO that represents 220,000 union members of the state. He was the longest-serving president of the Federation, having been elected in 1988 and retired from that office in 2013. He's a plumber by trade and joined the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Union 44 years ago. He's the former president and business manager of the United Association of Plumbers, Pipe Fitters, and Steam Fitters, Local 133, and a former secretary-treasurer of the Connecticut State Building and Construction Trades Council. He served as labor's representative on numerous boards and commissions, including Connecticut Innovations, the Connecticut Employment and Training Commission, the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund, the National Board of the Elderly Housing Development and Operations Corporation, the Thomas Commission to the Study State Government, the study of L'Ambiance Plaza disaster, the study of the clean energy explosion in Middletown, and the AFL-CIO Advisory Board for State Federations and Labor Councils. He was the longest-serving president of the John J. Driscoll United Labor Agency. The MTC is affiliated with the AFL-CIO. Welcome, gentlemen. We're going to start today, and I'm just going to ask each of you to, if you would, just tell us why you joined the union and how you got involved in union leadership. Wayne, would you like to begin?
So, being hired at Electric Boat, I didn't see any reason not to join. And my knowledge was that unions are out there to represent people and look out for their best interests. So that's how I did, join the union at Electric Boat anyways. And when I was in high school, I belonged to the food and commercial workers who represented the workers at the AMP grocery store in New London. And like I say, I was in high school then, so I really didn't know that much about the union at the time, but I've probably been union most of my life anyways. As far as getting into the leadership, I guess I have to blame this guy here. He wanted my parking spot. And while I was a committee chairman, I had been appointed to that position, but every day walking to work, Mr. Olson would, ask me if I'd run for office in the next election, and I kept saying no, and I finally did and was appointed or elected financial secretary in 1988. So that's how I got involved.
Thank you very much. Mel?
Well, I got out of the active military service and I wanted to learn a skilled trade. And the best place to get a good apprentice program was at Electric Boat, where the union and the company had a good state-sponsored apprenticeship program. And I got involved in that, and at the same time joined the union. I became involved in the union first because I was looking for a night out once in a while, and my buddy and I said, why don't we run for union steward? We go to union meetings, then we can go have a beer. Little did I know, 30 years later, and 13 years as president and 30 years off and on as vice president, I became overly involved. But I enjoyed it. I learned a lot from it. I think the only public speaking I ever did the first time was when I got up for an election. And it's being active in the union has been terrific and changed my life.
Thank you. Ken?
When I started, that was back in 1973, and I had the habit of, if I thought there was an injustice, I would say something. And a lot of my co-workers and close friends of mine thought that I would be a good candidate to be a union steward. So I became a union steward, and I rose to become the business manager of the Boilermakers, and then in 1991 became the president of the Metal Trades Council. And like I said, I was one of those folks that if I had something to say, I would say it, and I think that's how I am today. Early, especially in the shipyard, that was a tough place to work, and I just saw so many injustices in how some people were treated. I just did not like it. I would not like to be treated that way myself. And I tend to think that the workplace is a kinder, gentler place over the years. But that's how I got involved in the union.
Thank you. John?
My father's a Norwegian immigrant, and his family was obviously Labor Party, and he was a carpenter, union carpenter here. He encouraged me to, go down and join the plumbers union because it was a more skilled trade, commanded more money. Obviously, my concerns were safety and money for the work I was doing. That's why I joined the union. Why I got involved in the union? While I was an apprentice, we didn't have any voice or vote. We had monthly meetings. I went to all the meetings. We went out on strike twice in 3 years, and both those times for 6 weeks. When I came back for the same amount of money as what I went out on strike for. The journeymen were able to get an increase because the apprentices were on a fixed wage that they would get every 6 months. I saw that as an injustice, and I decided I was going to, at my first attempt, to try to change that. So 5 years you had to put in before you could vote or run for office. As soon as my opportunity came, I ran, and I started at the bottom and worked my way up. And I'm proud to say that when I became business manager, I changed that and put it apprentices on a percentage basis rather than a fixed dollar amount to eliminate that injustice.
Thank you. Our program is called Organizing for Change, and although in your cases, all of your unions far predate your involvement with them, we're mostly going to focus on the experiences that you've had with your unions. And I'm going to pose this first question here to Ken DelaCruz and Mel Olson. What were some of the issues around which you organized? What were the issues that existed between you and your unions and Electric Boat? And what were the actions that you needed to take as a union in order to make headway with them?
I know the first time that we had difficult negotiations in 1973, the major issue was the cost of living increase. There was a lot of unions getting cost of living increases in their contract, so we felt that we should get one. And I think that what had happened is the leadership of the union had built the aspiration level of the members of the union higher than they should have prior to the negotiations, because the cost of living was really a tough hurdle to get over. And that was one of the issues that caused us to have a problem. And then in 1976, we got a great contract. Things went great. That was one of my first negotiations. I got elected after 73 to vice president. And very difficult negotiations. And we were up at the Holiday Inn in Norwich, and we were having breakfast. One of the guys ordered a can of prune juice. I said, hey, can you get a six-pack of that? And she said, sure. I said, well, here's a room number. Would you send this six-pack up with a note saying the union would like some movement? And so we sent it up to the company. And lo and behold, we got a pretty good contract. I don't know if it's a prune juice, but it was a good contract. And then things went downhill a little bit when Pawtucket Valley Otis came into the shipyard. We certainly ended up with a long strike, but that was more of an economic strike, and it was over wages and benefits and pay. So that was that one. And then naturally we had one in 1983, and that was after we affiliated with the UAW, and that was also over wages. And at that time, the government had put out some wage minimum standards, and I think it might have been 3%, and the company offered us 0.00, so that was the end of those negotiations. We ended up on a strike for quite a while, but it all worked out. But in 79, when we did go out on strike, Chris Dodd got involved in the negotiations and stayed in the hotel. He was a congressman all night. And we probably wouldn't have, I don't know if we'd ever settled it without his help. He was terrific. He was brilliant. He could go back and forth between the two rooms, the company and the union. And within a half hour, he knew all the details and where the problems were and how to fix it. And he would come into our room and he could mimic each of the company managers. And he was great at it, you know. He could come in and he'd act out one of them, and then he'd act out the other one. I'm sure he would go into their room and acting us out for them, you know. But he was a brilliant guy, and to this day, we, of course, even when he was a senator, the labor movement owed Chris Dodd a lot.
Well, but, you know, what people don't understand is, you know, a strike is gut-wrenching. It's not something that you take very lightly. And that, you know, number one, the union doesn't call a strike, it's the people that call a strike. And we've had some, you know, tough strikes. In the 60s, we had two of them.
Thank you.
One was for about a few weeks and another one was for about 8 weeks. And then back in 75, we had a strike from July to December. In 1988, we had another strike. And it just so happens that was the first negotiations that I'd ever been in, and I went to all of these different schools. I went to George Meany Labor Institute on negotiations and University of Connecticut, and I got to say that it didn't follow any of those guidelines set forth by these by the colleges. And but I just want to make sure that everybody recognizes that strikes are not, it's the last resort. It's not the first resort. It's the very last resort. You know, often run into people, they seem to think that joining a union that you're going to be on strike. And I've got to say, at least from my perspective, that is the very last thing that we want to do. But coming out of them, sometimes you come out ahead, sometimes you hold your own. But I think what happens after those things is long-lasting in relationships and trying to get things done and moving forward, where you have people that are upset, especially when, with us, the rank and file, that are, giving up their wages for long periods of time. It's very stressful, not only to the individuals, but, to the family, the local economy. And it's tough trying to mend those bridges after you've been down those routes. But we've had them, and, sometimes, if you're looking for a wage, especially when you see the CEOs and the companies doing very well, and they're real tight with the buck and don't want them, even on a modest increase, that's insulting to the workforce, and like I said, it's the very last resort, and you can't rule it out, but hopefully we move forward from that. I can say we have a much better relationship with Electric Boat today than we did in the years past.
In 1937, there was a strike at Electric Boat by the industrial union and shipyard workers, and that strike was to gain recognition to be a bargaining agent for the production workers. In 1944, there was a short strike, from what I understand, 4 days, I think, over a union's claim that the company had violated provisions of the Public Contracts Act. In 1962, you mentioned that there were strikes, and among the issues and things that were gained were seniority rights, paid holiday, company paid sick leave, some of the things that we certainly take for granted today. I'm going to show just a short clip, and this is a clip from 1975. It was taken by Mel Olson, and I'm just going to show it just for a minute, and then I'm going to ask you, if you would, to describe what's going on here, what the issues were around this strike, and whether the strike was successful. Mel, you took the film. You started in '73, Ken, so you would have been there for that strike?
Yeah, I was there during that period, yes.
Is that Article 40?
Yeah, a lot of that was back then. It was with craft jurisdiction, and back then, a lot of people saw that as one of their priorities. They put their livelihood on the line for that. We were out there. What was that? From June 30th to like the first week in December.
Yeah. I think that at that time, I think the governor, who was Governor Elagrasso, overreacted with the state police, and she saw that movie. The next day, she pulled the state police out and brought in the local police, and everything quieted right down. And it was a much better situation with the local police there. They knew most of the guys that were picketing, and they got a good organizational picket line, letting people through and things like that. But the first day, it was a little bit difficult, to say the least.
Was the strike successful?
Well, it depends on your perspective. I mean, for the workers, it was, because we showed our dissatisfaction with some of the wants of the company, and in that sense, it was. And I believe that I wasn't in that negotiations, but it was my understanding that we fought back some of the more harsher areas of what the company had wanted. They had literally backed off.
A strike successful. Well, what's interesting, after the problems we did have in labor relations with the electric boat, things got much better. We started to work together as a team. If you look at it, 99% of the goals of the union are the same as the goals for the company. We all want to be successful. We want the company to be successful. It's just a matter of how much we share.
The success.
The success, right? But there's a better way to do business than having a strike. I think you have to be careful with the membership that you don't build up an aspiration level that's higher than you can meet. And you got to communicate that with knowledge and information about where the company is. And the company has to be careful also that they don't overestimate the issues or underestimate them when they go into negotiations. And that's a matter of open negotiations, conversation, talking about it. Where in the old traditional days when these strikes took place, we did traditional bargaining. We come in, we sat on one side of the table, they sat on the other. We gave them a proposal, they gave us a proposal. We didn't smile, we didn't laugh. Now we go in, we talk, we throw ideas up on the thing. What's the problem? Then we all throw ideas up, try to solve the problem instead of trying to out-cage each other. So it's just a better way of doing business at Electric Boat today. At least I was president for 13 years, and we always had successful negotiations, and we had great people working there in management, like Mike Toner and Jim Turner. So things have changed drastically in the labor relations field at Electric Boat.
Well, let me take you back a little bit to the time of two of the strikes that the MDA had. In 1979, you struck for 9.5 months, mostly over efforts to break the union, to keep the union from functioning. And then in 1983, you went on strike for 14.5 months. I'm going to show just a little snippet here. It's a very different look. But if you'll just, again, tell us what was going on at this time, what were the issues, and in your perspective, was the strike successful?
Well, we was, obviously, that's where the wages were on the table. There was that government, I said earlier, government guidelines put out, and the company didn't even meet the guidelines. At the bargaining table, they wanted to give us 0, 0, 0, so it made it difficult for the union to negotiate the contract.
Now, this looks like what we envision a strike looking like. As we slip into another frame here, I'm going to see something a little bit different that I'd also, this is a little bit different look.
Well, I'd like to speak to that. I think there's one of the placards up here. The gentleman with the wheelbarrow had it full of $20 bills, and he had the picture of the person that ran Electric Boat at the time, Pete Otis, who made a statement that he had 2 thorns in his side when he took over the management of the company, and that was the MDA and OSHA. And that was during one of the strikes, and Jim was dressed, and he looked a lot like Pete Otis, Jim being a Greek, Jim Colonis, and he was passing out these dollar bills and whatever $20 bills, and I think at the time there was a launching down at the main gate, so it was quite an event that we had, and it was one of our better picket lines, I would say, wouldn't you, Mel?
Yeah, I'd say there was a launching that day, and we were picketing on one side of the fence, and the people were going into the launching on the other side, and we were giving out balloons to the kids. That's like it'd be unfair. They were taking them into the shipyard. The strikes are never fun. It's difficult. It breaks families up. It's a hardship on people, and if you can avoid having a strike, the best thing to do is work real hard at it, because to me that's a failure of the negotiations for both parties. when you end up on a strike.
You've mentioned the hardship that it places on families to have a strike. And the strikes were long strikes in some cases, very long strikes. How did families get through them? How did your unions help the families to get through them?
Well, that's how for us back in 1988, that's how the Gemma Moran Food Center got started, was out of our strike back in 1988. We had gotten together and we had to do something to help our members out, so we were doing, getting donations and what have you to help out. I know the MDA helped us out as well, to help feed our members that were in desperate need. And that, you know, today that in New London, the Gemma Moran Food Center serves about 20,000 equivalent meals a month. And so that was a good thing that actually came out of the strike, is that once that was over, we continued to keep that food bank going. It was started off in the back. There was a shed. We converted this old shed building behind the machinist hall. We all went in there and cleaned it up and got freezers for the meat and things, and it just carried on, and we just and it was Gemma that actually realized that there was a need in this region for a food bank, and it has actually grown to what it is today. And it was Gemma Moran that helped us. At that time, she was the labor liaison for the United Way. But
Yeah.
that was one of the things that was very helpful during those tough times.
Wayne, how about the MDA?
Well, in the MDA, we had a bigger problem because the strikes were a lot longer than the ones in the MTC, and there wasn't any way, even though we had a strike benefit and I think our insurance were paid for, we just couldn't stay out much longer. I mean, the families were hurting, whatever. So we set up job banks, and we dealt with contractors who hired our people to work all over the country. We had people on the Gulf Coast, we had people on the West Coast, we had people down in Virginia. We had so many people out there, it was unbelievable. And when you work as a contractor like that, it's a very high rate of pay. There aren't any benefits, but it's a very high rate of pay, and people were able to get by, but still they had the hardships of being away from their families, their homes, and it was devastating to a lot of people to be away that long, and frankly, it ruined a lot of lives. But we were able to see our way through by sending people out and getting them good jobs. So,
John?
Strikes are, the last resort, but I would have to say almost every strike is successful. And what you can't do is measure it monetarily for those members at that time. Every generation has fought for better conditions for the next generation. If we didn't have strikes, we wouldn't have health care, we wouldn't have pensions, we wouldn't have 8-hour work days, we wouldn't have any health and safety, we would have had none of these things. We wouldn't have unions. And the sad thing about what's happening today is that when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, our government believed that this was a desirable way for workers to address the issues with the employers. Sadly to say that every piece of legislation and every action since the act has been to attack and erode that National Labor Relations Act. So as Kenny said, out of these strikes here, and these were very visible strikes in the state of Connecticut, just to say on the one film that was shown up here of the overreaction of El Grasso with the dogs and the state police, when Bill O'Neill was faced with a similar circumstance, he he already knew not to do that. So that demonstration had solved that. That was in '88. And I think it was 2 years later when there was the Pittston action down in Greenwich, and it was about 3,000 people came to Greenwich. And you can imagine the thoughts of having to have dogs and state police and, National Guard and whatever else down there. But O'Neill realized that what you couldn't do is inflame the situation. He responsibly had the kind of personnel in place if needed, but he reacted based on these things here, and these were clearly guidance for not just Bill O'Neill, but other governors to see how they would react. Unions they've been out there fighting for years, and one doesn't measure a strike that's taken on because sometimes what happens is you fight what might look like a battle that you can't figure out, why are they on strike, but for us as workers, and again, it was said, the union is the workers. And there's pretty stringent tests to go on strike in many of these unions. So we don't take it lightly, and there's a serious test on a vote in order to go out on strike. And I'm glad to say that labor relations has been much better here, as well as Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky for years. They had a strike down there about 5-6 years ago, but they went about 30 years without a strike. But for the most part, where unions are, there's pretty decent labor relations, because I think the employer, you have to show the employer that you're willing to fight. If you're not willing to fight, they're going to take advantage of you.
John mentioned that a lot of the things that we have, that we enjoy as workers, are things that have come because of strikes or because of union activity, union organization. Mel and Ken, what are some things that you can point to in your experience, some changes that you have been able to accomplish through your union activities?
Well, one of the most visible thing, especially on the shipyard side, it's inherently a very dangerous place to work. You're working with heights, you have heavy lifts going on. There's a lot of activity there. It's literally a small city in itself. One of the things that we have been working on for years, and we've been very, very successful at it, is improving the safety in the shipyard. I remember when I first came to Electric Boat, I was a welder apprentice, and there wasn't a whole lot of safety equipment there. The guys, we used to have guys that we call chippers, and processes in welding they call carbon gouging, it sounds like a 50 caliber machine gun going off. And guys used to take cigarette filters and put them in their ears to protect their hearing. There wasn't any safety data sheets. They used to have barrels of trichloroethylene that we'd use to wipe down metal prior to putting wood laminate on the submarines. All of us, when you would get grease or molly coat on your hands, would literally use trichloroethylene. It worked great to get it off your hands, but it also is a carcinogen, and it also, with a lot of people, destroyed the oil on their hands. We had asbestos that over the years in shipbuilding. I remember my early days of working in a reactor, and after a few hours, you would take an air hose and blow yourself off because you'd be covered in it like light snow. But over the years, we have taken a very active role in the safety in the shipyard. Most of the stuff that we're doing now is actually union driven. We have one of the safest shipyard records in the country. And we're still working at it. You know, it's something that we're constantly trying to improve. I remember when I first started at EB, it was my uncle that talked me into, I was planning on just going to electric boat, go through the apprenticeship, and go on the road. He worked with the pipe fitters, and he used to travel from job to job. That didn't happen, but and I remember when he lying in his deathbed from asbestosis, and I realized that you know, this is a very terrible disease to be to come in contact with, and you know, one of the folks that's in this room, Matt Schaffner, did a tremendous role for us in the early years in bringing it to light and taking care of our members that were afflicted with asbestosis. So thank you.
Mel?
Well, I want to thank Matt also. I don't know if anybody will ever be able to know the number of lives that he has saved, so it's a fantastic person. Some of the things we've accomplished while I was there was we got a 4 10-hour work week, which with today's family, 45% single parents, 3 days off instead of 2 days is very helpful. And we also got flex time, which is another thing. If you're a single parent, you got children going to school, it helps to have a little flex time, because there's always a problem when you're trying to get little children off to school. The other thing is that was important, I think, is we got a dollar for matching dollar for every dollar you put into the stock savings plan, which today is mostly your retirement benefit, and that was a big issue, and I think it's a big thing that, especially in General Dynamics stock, it's a pretty good deal.
Wayne, a couple of people have mentioned that the relationship has really changed at EB now between labor unions and the management. Can you describe that change? What is it like now at EB?
Well, sure I can, and I'm glad you brought it up, because we've been talking about the strikes and the bad times at Electric Boat, and we are on better groundwork right now, and the reason for that is the culture change process that was brought into Electric Boat. That came with new management at Electric Boat, and that person was Jim Turner, who came out of Virginia. I believe that he worked for our competitor down there, and he was hired by Electric Boat. But I can remember that he said to Roy Colville, who was president of the MDA at the time, he said that he didn't particularly care for unions, but if there was a union at Electric Boat, he was going to work with it. And it wasn't long after that the company approached the union, and that was the MDA. There were only 4 officers. 2 of our officers were out on sick leave, and they had proposed to us that we get involved in a problem-solving endeavor, and it was called the culture change process. And we did that. We had a consultant come in from St. Louis. That was Hoshman and Associates. I think it was a different name at the time, but he's Hoshman now. I do talk to him from time to time. Now, that culture change process was a process where the company said, well, first of all, the 4 officers that decided they were going to participate in it said, what the hell, things are so terrible now, and we had a lot of problems. We were tired of the strikes, so we said, we'll give it a try. We were told, you can try it. If you don't like it, you can get out. So we did give it a try, and I'm still to this day say it's the best thing we ever did. Our relationship improved and steadily improved, and I have to say it's to a point where it's the best relationship we've ever had due to that. Now, Roy Colville stepped down after 2 years. He went up to the Region 9A, and Mel Olson ended up with steering that new process through, and the new process of negotiations, which were a collaborative approach rather than a confrontational, and a sort of a much better way of negotiating, and we made a lot of improvements that way. The relationship got a heck of a lot better, and it is to this day. So I credit the culture change and our participating with the company to bring that whole endeavor around. So happy we did it.
One thing about the culture change was when Mike Toner took over as vice president. Even with the culture change, we would finish the negotiations, and sometimes there was animosity. So we went to Harvard Law School for a conference. There was Bob Nardone, Mike Toner, myself, and John Werby. And at that conference, the company had to negotiate, and they were the union. We had to negotiate with the company. And they set parameters. And it was, I think, an eye-opener for the company to see what the issues were that the unions had to meet, why they needed certain things to get a contract passed. And you couldn't just, it wasn't just draw a line and say, this is it. There's reasons why the union wants different things changed. And after that, things went really good. But what I think happened is the corporation pulled back a little. And the corporation now says, this is the parameters of the negotiations, of the package. What you do inside, in the nuts and bolts of the contract with the union, is up to you and the union. It's not going to be dictated by the corporation. And I think that made it so much easier. You knew the parameters, you knew you couldn't go outside it, you had to figure out with a model, figure out how much it was going to cost to move it here, move it there. But then the union could say, well, I want it over here, over there. And if it stayed within the model of the parameters that were agreed to at the corporation, it made it negotiation much easier.
I think it was a realization of, shared interest and probably a little more respect for each other. When I first got involved, you had a hard time sitting in the same room together at times, and I've got to say that even though it's better, we don't sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya. We don't always disagree, but at least we're able to. What really aggravates the company, and I hear it all the time, is that they say, well, in places, especially when we get some of the management that come from non-union facilities, they'll say, well, when I was there, I didn't have to go through all of this. And what the union, what we do is, and it's, concerns of our members, we'll question, why they want to do something, or sometimes it doesn't pass the dumb test. You just get somebody in there that comes in from out of town, and they just say, I'm the new sheriff in town, and this is how we're going to do it. And some of the stuff may make sense, but some of it doesn't pass the dumb test. You can tell that it's just the ego-driven, dictate that probably adds no value to the product. But it's a better way of doing business where you can sit down and we don't always agree, but at least we're able to put the issues on the table so that there's a better understanding of both parties.
John, Ken said a minute ago that that people share the same interests or find the same interests. There are people who would say that unions hurt business, they hurt the business climate. How would you react to that?
Well, unions are, they should be very desirable. Many of the things that have been discussed here, whether it be jurisdictions, problems, these were worked out with a committee and a company, and once you reach an agreement, then the union is a partner in that agreement, and they help you carry that out. Especially in places like Electric Boat, Pratt Whitney, Sikorsky's, these are places with a lot of complex things they need to do. So unions, when you look at unions from the standpoint of productivity, longevity of the workers, the quality of work, the skills they have, safety, which again, safety is bringing the cost of doing business down. There's less people getting hurt. You continue your workforce with the continuity that you need to have. Those are all things that are desirable. The problem that we have is sometimes your parent organizations. I believe Electric Boat is overall a very good employer. They wanted to do things, I'll give you a good example. We were able, going back probably about 20 years ago, we were talking about the need to, train workers to do more than just build submarines. We had Electric Boat agreed to take, I think it was about, I don't know, a couple of $1 billion from the state of Connecticut, and we were going to use that to work on economic conversion so that we could see if we could build other things at Electric Boat. What happened was General Dynamics didn't like that idea. The money was given back to the state of Connecticut. Lowell Weicker was the governor at that time. Whether it be General Dynamics with Electric Boat, whether it be UTC with Sikorsky, the parent organization sometimes becomes a problem. And, dictators, it's an authoritarian system without a union. If you don't have a union, there is no democracy in a workplace. And if you really want to, solve problems, and you take that further than just a workplace. When you lose unions, you lose the opportunity for workers to have a way to raise their grievances, address their grievances. And I would say this, unions are raising standards, conditions, wages, and benefits, not just for their members, but for everyone. And what we've seen is the proof is in the pudding. You'll see as unions have been on a decline, some of that is our fault. I mean, some of that is we haven't aggressively organized. A lot of it has been as a result of the last 40 years. Our economy's been turned on its head. We were about 70% manufacturing, industrial, 30% service. We're on our head now. It's about 80-20. And, there's a real challenge for unions now to be that voice for workers in all those new, emerging, professions and industries that are out there. And if we're not going to do that, then I think we suffer as a nation. I don't think we'll be competitive. I think we have the greatest products. We have the most skilled workers. You can measure us on we'll measure ourselves with any country as far as our workers. And if we don't have unions to fight for those things that make us those kinds of workers, then we're going to become a second-rate nation.
What is the future for unions? Private sector unions are declining. The political climate is different. We have states where unions have been strong and they've been under heavy attack. How are unions going to have to adapt? How have they adapted and how will they have to adapt to survive in the future? Mel?
Well, disappointed in their adaptation process. The unions haven't really adapted well to what's going on. The companies are well organized to fight unions, and the labor laws, like John said earlier, have been weakened and weakened over the years. And you see it in the wage disparity You see it in the middle class being crushed, and you can relate that directly to the private sector, 6% organized. So it's the unions have to figure out a better way to do it. I blame the educational system. I think that the educational system has not done the unions any favor. They're afraid to talk about unions. Somebody might complain to them. They don't talk about the benefits, but that's one of the weak areas that we really got to get to is the young people in the education business. All they're getting is the company rhetoric that unions are not good and you don't need them and you're an independent person and you can do it on your own. And that's not the answer. You got to work together. Workers do.
John?
You know, we're in our adolescence as a nation, and we went through the industrial revolution, you know, in this country, and we had to adapt to that. We've gone through another revolution here, and you know, when we're looking at information technology, the change of work, what's happening, and the model that we have, you know, it was a radical approach when the auto workers had to sit in. What they did is they didn't go out on strike; they sat in. That was a radical idea because they felt if they went out, someone could come in and they could work. So they adapted to that. It was you know, finding a way to deal with the challenges we were faced with. I would go so radical. You know, the Knights of Labor had disappeared because it wasn't needed. It was an old association, didn't negotiate wages, hours, conditions. And I think we may have to come back to a way where we have a model that may be, you know, finding how do we give workers who happen to be, you know, working out of their houses or wherever else they are an opportunity to collectively come together and make their workplace, which happens to be in their house, you know, better. You could almost look at the old sewing machine where a mother went in with her daughter and they're in there and almost like tied to a sewing machine in a sweatshop. Today, they have their daughter and they're tied together with a fax machine or you know, a laptop and printers and they get, for all I know, the kids in there doing data entry because they're pretty good at all of that stuff. So we need to understand we need to change. And a lot of that is you know, national unions have to find out that their numbers are decreasing. I think right now, you know, we had public sector unions increase the numbers back in, you know, 1950. In a heyday of the labor movement, there was really no public employee unions. And as we had risen as a private sector unions, we fought to give I believe all workers should and need to have the opportunity to collectively bargain. So we used our strength as the private sector to give the public sector that opportunity. Now what's happened is our numbers are less in the private sector than it is in the public sector today. And if you start to look at the states like Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, you know, when you start to look down south, I mean, it's a disaster. I mean, there's maybe 5% you know, union workers in a workforce, including public employees, which, you know, is really a challenge. So I think we need to be creative and think outside the box and need to change and be less, you know, rigid about our old models and understand we need new models.
Ken, I'm going to let you have the last word here. What do you see for the future of your union?
Well, you know, with the changing technology, you know, the educational process, and I think Mel mentioned that these kids today, they don't know what a union is. They're on the impression that you know, I just give these guys a monthly dues and they don't do anything for me. For the folks that have lived through it and seen you know, the difference in pay and in benefit structure, you know, they recognize it. But going forward, I think that, you know, the educational process is going to be very important, not only to raise the skill of the newer people entering the workforce, but also I think it's cyclical in nature that, you know, a lot of times, you know, you got to get kicked in the butt to take some action. And I think that as the numbers continually, if they continue to decrease, people, you know, will slowly come to the realization that, you know, I want a better, make a better living for myself and create a better future for my children. When I was growing up, I was always left with the impression that we were the standard for the rest of the world. And it seems like we reversed it now, and we're, you know, we're in a rush, you know, to decrease our standard of living to be like the rest of the world. So I do think that, you know, there's a place for unions because, and I was just sitting here and through the discussion, I remember back in 1988, it was my first negotiations, and we were asking for a very modest increase in wages. And the corporate person, as John has said, a lot of times it isn't the local people, it's the people outside. And I basically said, it's not that we can't afford to give you a raise, we're just not giving you one. And so that just, you know, put a little more wood on the fire.
Well, I think that concludes our time, but I want to thank each of you for coming and sharing your experiences with us. It was really very informative, and I think that we need to continue to look at labor union history, the strides that we've made together.